Warning: this film contains sensitive content. Viewer discretion is advised. Terrorism. You might see this act of violence in films, TV shows, documentaries, video games, and even in local and international news. But what exactly is terrorism? This might surprise you, but the term terrorism doesn't actually have an official, legal, academic, and universally agreed upon definition. Though, in the broadest sense, it is the use of intentional violence, generally against civilians, for political and social purposes. The term terrorist, meaning terrorist, is first used in 1794 by the French philosopher François-Noël Babeuf, who denounced his Maximilien Robespierre's Jacobin regime as a dictatorship. There are over 109 different definitions of terrorism. This is likely due to the fact that terrorism is a charged term, which essentially means being politically or emotionally persuasive, appealing, or influential. Such an example is having governments and non-state groups use the term to abuse or denounce opposing groups. Since 1994, the United Nations General Assembly has repeatedly condemned terrorist acts using the following political description of terrorism, which is criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the public, a group of persons, or particular persons for political purposes are in any circumstance unjustifiable, whatever the considerations of political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any other nature that may be invoked to justify them. Depending on the country, the political system, and the time in history, the types of terrorism are varying. In early 1975, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration in the United States formed the National Advisory Committee on Criminal Justice Standards and Goals. One of the 5 volumes that the committee wrote was titled Disorders and Terrorism, produced by the task force, which defines terrorism as a tactic or technique by means of which a violent act or the threat thereof is used for the prime purpose of creating overwhelming fear for coercive purposes. It classified disorders and terrorism into 6 categories: civil disorder, political terrorism, non-political terrorism, quasi-terrorism, limited political terrorism, and official or state terrorism. As well as there being no agreed definition of terrorism, there's a similar lack of consensus regarding the causes or motivations behind terrorism, such as intimidation, local or internal social standing, cultural tolerance of violence, perceived legitimacy of the state, religious beliefs or zealotry, mental health, nationalism, financial support for the family, and international attention. International attention was used by the Islamic terrorist group known as Al-Qaeda in its attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in the United States on the ever-so-famous date September 11, 2001, or commonly known as 9/11. These attacks were used to draw international attention to struggles that are otherwise unreported. The attacks killed 2,996 people, injured over 6,000 others, and caused at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. Also, the United States has the highest number of school-related shootings, even though these acts have taken place in many countries around the world. In 2017, according to the Global Terrorism Database or GTD, the top 3 countries that experience terrorism are Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Philippines, respectively. Speaking of the Philippines, since January 2000, radical Islamist groups and separatist forces in the Philippines have carried out over 40 major bombings against civilians and civilian property, mostly in the southern regions of the country around Mindanao, Basilan, Jolo, and other nearby islands. Numerous bombings have also been carried out in and around Metro Manila, though several hundred kilometers from the conflict in its southern regions, due to its political importance. In the period of 2000 to 2007, attacks killed nearly 400 Filipino civilians and injured well over 1,500 more. The 2004 Super Ferry 14 bombing on February 27, 2004 was a terrorist attack that resulted in the sinking of the ferry Super Ferry 14 and the deaths of 116 people in the Philippines, which was considered the deadliest terrorist attack in the Philippines. The perpetrators were the Abu Sayyaf, which is officially known by ISIL as the Islamic State of the East Asia Province. It is based in and around Jolo and Basilan Islands in the southwestern part of the Philippines, where for more than 4 decades, Moro groups have been engaged in an insurgency seeking to make the province independent. Together with Abu Sayyaf, the most notorious terrorist groups in the Philippines are the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or the MILF, the Raa Sulaiman Movement, and the Maute Group. On May 23, 2017, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte issued the proclamation of martial law and suspension of the privilege of writ of habeas corpus in the whole Mindanao. In case of a terrorist attack, always remember these 5 words.
Run. Hide.
Tell. Save.
Fight.
This is a tough and cruel world we live in. We never know what might happen next. Just like natural hazards such as storms, earthquakes, and floods, terrorist attacks can happen anytime, anywhere, at any place. You must be ready for whatever might happen because it will not just cost your life, but others as well. So act accordingly to prevent anything bad from happening, to avoid this hazard from turning into a disaster.